This is the fourth day of this August 1980 7-day session, and we shall continue reading from the Tiger's Cave, the commentary on the Heart Sutra, edited by Trevor Leggett, and the commentaries by the Abbott Obora. The Bodhisattva Kanon, having practiced the profound prajna paramita, penetrated to the true world of nirvana in the midst of life, the life which cannot be evaded however we try. In Buddhism, another word for life is the wheel of birth and death. A wheel once set going continues to turn. So it is a symbol of life. Must be very careful with this word continues. Is it continuing or is it always fresh? Continuing yet not continuing. Turning is an important idea in Buddhism, and there's no sutra which does not refer to it. Our heart turns, impelled by some force, and that impelling force is very mighty. In a great flood, bridges, houses, and everything is carried away. And the vaunted human strength becomes a tiny thing in the face of the power of nature. One saw on television a sumi master, a master of sumi painting, and was teaching a little class there. Each time there was a new subject that he chose, and one time, just with a few strokes, there was a huge mountain and a precipice, a valley and a little bridge, the field there. And he was explaining, in every good painting there's always heaven and earth. And then on the bridge, a few little tiny dots, and he said, human beings, just accessory. We think of it just the other way around. Everything else is our accessory. Admittedly, Obora continues, in a certain sense, man does conquer nature. But really the word conquer is a complete misnomer. Man boasts that he conquers a mountain or something by his human strength, but in fact he is the conquered one. He's always subdued. How ridiculous to speak seriously of conquering a mountain. To the whole Eastern world was a most unfathomable thing when these Westerners with their sports gear and things came in to conquer these mountains. Unfathomable to think of conquering a mountain. In the beginning, very reluctant to even help as carriers making money. Money was very important, a livelihood, but there's always an ominous sense of something being wrong in that. Of the mountain taking revenge on such attempts to be conquered. There's this book, most of you may be familiar with it, and there was quite a dramatic movie made out of it called Moby Dick, where this one-legged dark captain sets out to take his revenge on Moby Dick, that white whale. Who already in a previous attempt bit off the captain's leg. I don't know whether he bit it off or whether it was just lost in the futile attempt to conquer that white whale. There's this incredible scene in the movie. It's an old movie, but they did it very well. These little accessories with their little harpoons, trying to... What did they think they were doing? And Moby Dick just swimming back and forth, slashing a bit with the fins, and whoom, the wave overcomes the boat, and everybody's in the water, drowning. And Moby Dick, just with a few lots of harpoons that just stick out like whiskers, floating off into the land. There was just one survivor, this Ishmael, whatever you pronounce him, is this innocent observer. This young man who wanted to go on this trip. He's the narrator. And he narrates everything openly, freely. If I remember correctly, there's no taking sides in there. Just describes this whole incredible, futile venture. And he survives. How ridiculous to speak seriously of conquering a mountain. Idle good-for-nothings use such phrases. But far from being conquerors, we find them nothing but a nuisance to the world. Nuisance to the world being fame seekers, people who want to become something out of an adventure like that. There's actually nothing wrong in climbing a mountain. Have you ever done it? Why does one need to conquer it? What an idea. But to climb a mountain, it's a marvelous thing. And the view, no obstruction, unless one is in the clouds. And it's kind of chilly and wet. The impelling force of which we spoke is the force of nature. We can maybe say the force of life. And against it, our human strength can at most offer a limited check or resistance. For the time comes when its might is irresistible. That force is turning the wheel all the time. And this is called revolving in the 6 worlds. Must be careful not to think there is a force which revolves the wheel. And he comes to speak of this later. It's ourselves, the force of the me, and the I, and the mine, and this petty little willpower of ours, in the service of craving and desire, which turns this wheel. But if one thinks of life as a totality, including the mountains and rivers and glaciers, oceans, that is not created by the me. It is there and it is constantly changing. Just as this whole universe with all its galaxies, stars, nebulae, constantly changing. Today we get messages of changes that have taken time so long ago we can't even fathom it. The wheel, this wheel of human revolving, this little human whirlpool, has the heart at the center, which is the heart of clinging attachment. Here the word heart is used for clinging attachment, the nub, or the hub, what is it called? The hub of the wheel. Clinging attachment to selfhood. Self does not exist, but clinging to a non-existent self is the center on which the 6 worlds are upheld. Of the 6, the worlds of the Asuras, that's the demons, or titans, the heavens and the world of men are the good. I wonder why he says that. And the worlds of the animals, hungry ghosts, and hells are the bad. Actually, the human world includes all of those. All of those. It doesn't have to resort to the imagination of religious ascetics to witness hell on earth. And the demons who create these dungeons and concentration camps. And the animals, we have them all around us. If we look. In the cities, it's usually just cats and dogs. Birds. And there are ants and mice. We speak of our allotted place, but the truth is that it is not allotted to us by any god or Buddha. Buddhism does not speak of position as allotted by a god or a Buddha. An allotted state is spoken of for want of a better figure, but in fact there is no allotted state. Buddhism does not teach that God created the world or created man. This life, which cannot be got out of, however we may try, is not imposed on us by God or Buddha. Our present state has been raised up by each one of us on the delusion of the mind called sticking attachment to self, to the idea of the self, thinking what is not self to be a self. The worlds are created and they are self-created. The 6 worlds are upheld by the delusion that something exists which is non-existent. As we mentioned yesterday, it is the world of relationship which is created by the me. Of perverted relationship, of selfish relationship, of tense relationship, of hatred, anger, jealousy, envy. And in these relationships are the hells or the heavens, the animals or the demons, all in the shape of human beings. Even those called good are good worlds, but still based on sticking attachment to self. Good and bad alike are all relative states upraised on attachment to what is called self. Good, which is based on attachment to selfhood, is a state which still leaves considerable track of impurity. To do good for the sake of self-fulfillment. To do good for the sake of feeling good. I'm doing something good. To see that, not to condemn it. Throw up one's hand and say, well, what am I? And nothing I can do is unselfish. See how selfish you are. And in that seeing, can there be some measure of purity? Which means no condemnation, but a clear seeing, an honest seeing, open, frank, untinted. And of course, evil leaves a great track. While illusory clinging to self is not completely destroyed, seen through is the destruction. Seeing through it is the annihilation. Not thinking I must destroy myself. And if I'm successful, then I'm going to start destroying other selves. While illusory clinging to self is not completely destroyed, the worlds of illusion, whether good or evil, are upraised thereon. So the good is not complete good. It's all with the idea of getting something out of it. If I do this, then I shall get this. If I do that, then I shall get that. It is in the expectation of results, which is the upraising of this world of results. It is a good, but with oneself at the center, which is not goodness. In goodness there is no self and there is no opposite. Goodness is not the opposite of badness. In it there is no opposite. And no opposition. For example, says the Abbott, I set out to take some cakes as a present to a neighbor, which is a fine thing to do. All would be well if I made the heart empty and forgot the fact that I am doing a good action. But I won't do so. Quote, here I am carrying sweet cakes, and by there'll be a return. That's the way our thoughts go. This is honest seeing. And if one doesn't prefer the good thoughts to clear seeing, then these thoughts will melt away. But if one prefers to live with these good thoughts, then one will live with these good thoughts, which leave a track. And the track thickens when we don't get a hearty thanks for those cakes. People these days talk about sacrifice, about self-denial, about service. But as it is all based on attachment to self, quite soon they're expecting to see some results. So it is a mean, impure good, though good it may be called. After all, then, what is regarded generally as good is still a mean thing. And what to say of the evil which leads to the evil states? Until attachment to self at the center melts. While the heart deluded by an eye is not completely negated, good itself is an illusion, and evil also. While the illusion remains unbroken, the so-called good founded on self as it is, only by chance does one do any real good. Oh, I read this a little wrong. While the illusion remains unbroken, the so-called good founded on self as it is, only by chance does any real good. Has a few odds. We do some good, but by accident. Suppose in the role as a priest, one is teaching people. So I was thinking some more about this role, which came up yesterday. A better word would be function. One doesn't need to play a role while one is fulfilling a function. There are sweepers and there are merchants and there are priests. Can it be done without a facade, without playing a role, without this image built on top of it, how one ought to be doing this, how one ought to be looking to others in this role? Then it's a role. Suppose in the role as a priest one is teaching people, because the role in which he finds himself happens to be good, he's doing some good. Really looking into himself, this man. And looking in himself, he's looking into a human being, which is not different from other human beings, not setting himself apart as something special. That's true teaching. We say he does the good, but in fact, because of the part he is in, he has to do good, whether he wants to or not. Again, they will say of a religious man that he's conscientious. But that conscientiousness of his is nothing. It's just that the part requires it, and so he has to be like that. To be looking into oneself, what parts one plays, whether they really come out of genuine seeing what needs to be done, or whether one is imbued with a role that one ought to play. To discern this is what practice in everyday life is all about. The kindly and devoted teacher is in a role where he has to be kindly and devoted. And so he is kindly and devoted. Anyway, a bit. Because I guess maybe in Japan, so I've heard, I've never been there. And in many countries, this role playing is still so much deeper ingrained. And here, particularly in America, where these days one can wear blue jeans almost any place, even cut off ones. No, not quite. Still the vested suit of the businessman. But he tries to get into his jeans as soon as he gets home. But in many countries, the role is very, very narrowly defined. The words one has to use and the tone of voice, how one bows to whom, how deep, how not so quite so deep, and how a little bit deeper. All in that there is nothing genuine. What I always say to school teachers, this Abbott is also a teacher and a teacher of teachers, he's also a professor. What I always say to school teachers is this: you're teachers and I'm a priest. Kindly and devoted, both of us. We've got to be. But if the conditions were unfavorable, we'd quite likely be manifesting as demons or hungry ghosts or animals. We ought to find some other condition which is not moved under any circumstances, don't you think? Not talking from his pulpit down to these teachers, he says, don't you think we should do this together? While the illusory clinging to self is not negated, while the so-called without I, in Japanese it's called mu-ga, mu, always without. No, not. While the illusory clinging to self is not negated, while the so-called without I or muga is unattained, then it just depends on the environment whether we happen to be doing good or happen to be doing evil. Yeah. Bankei talks about that at great length. You think you're so good, come home from church, and then your servant is doing something wrong, and immediately you turn into an angry animal or a hungry ghost for something, wanting something. The sermon is over, it hasn't quite fulfilled one, so one wants something else. In Buddhism, the eternal meaninglessness round, always on the basis of illusion, the illusion of the me, is called the six worlds. Isn't that our life, the round of the worlds, happening to do good, happening to do evil? Again and again the same thing? Perhaps we're good now, but when the evil associations chance to rise, we begin to do wrong. Where is their security? If we just follow the associations, doing good or evil as chance has it, how can our footsteps ever be firm? Like that elephant trotting along the ground of the deepest water. Isn't it just a pointless circling round the circumference of the wheel? The other day I saw in a newspaper that a graduate of the Women's Teachers College had killed her stepchild. She was quite a figure in education. And yet, when for a moment she met with bad associations, she did that terrible thing. We read that here all the time, so often. Somebody murdered several people, and checking back to the teachers, he was always a good boy. As a matter of fact, he always got A's. Always striving, which means always pushed, inside or outside. Just developing one little part of himself. The rest of it atrophied, forgotten, left out, left uneducated. So however much we try, we can never escape from the worlds of good and evil which are constructed on our attachment of self, unless we smash this wrong clinging. Not I must smash it, because that's still the self. It's the self that needs to be smashed, wanting to smash itself. How ridiculous. And yet we do this all the time. Rather than just seeing, which is no small thing. The seeing without self. In which no tracks are left. The worlds are built by ourselves, so we cannot escape from them. This inescapability is called the wheel. The wheel of birth and death is to be caught, turning in pointless repetition or mechanicalness, habitualness. Forced to move though reluctant, impelled by the great and terrible force which Buddhism calls karma. All our past actions, memories, experiences, still pushing us, revolving us, having power over us. We're driven by the force of our previous actions. Our whole life is impelled by that karma. Suppose I go to the house next door, determined to keep calm and exchange a friendly greeting. But I find the neighbor's attitude insulting and shameful. And finally the karma bubbles up and I have become angry. Where does it bubble up from? I try to suppress it, but I can't. By that great force is our life moved each instant. Because the one trying to suppress it, that is the karma. It's still that same karma trying to repress itself. Someone presses a banknote on one. Go on, take it. Apparently as a priest he must have taken some vows of poverty or not taking pay, I don't know. It's not altogether an unpleasant feeling. Of course one ought not to take it. But in a poor priest like myself there's a little impulse to stretch out the hand. The karma of receiving bubbles up. All of this is from the heart. On the heart are constructed the worlds of good and ill. And the karma with which one has built those worlds, past and present, is moving then. However I resolve not to be greedy, my greediness appears. However I resolve not to be angry, my anger rises. Our human life is such that however we resolve not to weep over things, we come to the state of weeping. Is there anything beside making resolutions? Is there anything stronger than all resolutions? Because as this priest of many years' experience writes here openly, published for the public to read, all these resolutions always come to naught. Or do they? Is the resolution the eraser? Or is there another eraser altogether? We can't finish with this life. The spirit of Mahayana is to find the truth in each step of it. In anger itself, to see emptiness. To see emptiness. In the very complainings over our lot, to know the profound prajna paramita. Against our will, anger rises. To discover in the very midst of it the world of light. Is the meaning of the phrase, the passions are the body. This phrase was spoken by Wei Nang. The passions themselves are bodhi, which is no rationalization, not to be used as an excuse for indulging in passions. Nor is it a warning against indulging, or a prohibition. To discover in the very midst of the anger the world of light. Which is the profound meaning of this vow, Dharma gates beyond measure. I vow to penetrate. Not a Dharma gate in the future, but the Dharma gate in the midst of anger or discouragement, or pain, or fear. To discover in the midst of it light. Profundity, Obora continues, means to penetrate to the real form under the illusion. The truth in all the lies. And when the true character of the self is realized in the religious sense, that is the knowledge of ultimate emptiness. A fire to negate everything. Negating here again, not meaning withdrawing from the world, shutting oneself up someplace. It's not negating the senses or negating joy, but to see what is false, to see the emptiness in that. It's a matter of great energy and awareness, wakefulness, attention. To look through to the real form is to penetrate to one's reality, free from self-deception. We recite it every time. Form is only emptiness. Emptiness, only form. But what does this mean? What is the truth of that? Can one realize the truth of it directly? To look through to the real form is to penetrate to one's reality free from self-deception. This is the true renunciation. Not trying to throw away, yet throwing away all the time, freely, effortlessly, without the power of will, because will, as we recite, is also empty. Feeling, thought, and choice. In our translation of the Prajnaparamita, we have translated will as choice. It's empty, the will of the me. Yet to do, to see what needs to be done and to do it, well, one may call that willpower. It's an extra word which is not even necessary. When we can gaze steadily at our ignoble self and understand, this is itself the principle of renunciation. And understand. Didn't say and condemn or smash, but understand. When you really come to a deadlock, this is renunciation. The deadlock is the fact that the willpower comes to be seen as a helpless thing. That's another word. An ineffective thing. One finds oneself helpless, one who has always been able to achieve everything with this power of will. Here all of a sudden one finds oneself at a deadlock. When you really come to a deadlock, it is renunciation. To change our condition from this to that is not renunciation. Well, if I can't succeed here, I'll try something else. If that doesn't work, I'll try something else, and then something else. You'll never come to a deadlock this way. This is not renunciation. But when there's complete realization of the true character of oneself, and there's a feeling of throwing the self away, or the self dropping away, melting away, and that is the principle of renunciation. When we have penetrated to the bottom of this illusory self, not without negating, and yet not negating, there's the power of the knowledge of ultimate emptiness, and the self is thrown aside. This is the practice of the Bodhisattva Kano. Let us just read here as an appendix, so to speak. Again, some story that the Abbott tells of his own life. What then is our life of endless circling? It may be the mind arising beautiful as heaven. It may be the mind springing up as a hungry ghost, but both equally uncertain, because we have still to circle in the world of good and evil. I'm asked to speak before a congregation. I make my address just like a Jizo Bodhisattva, with a feeling that there's nothing in my heart. By the power of the knowledge of ultimate emptiness, I speak in a nirvana state, with nothing in the heart. And those who listen are also in the nirvana state, with nothing in their hearts. They're all like Kanon Bodhisattvas. And yet, this Jizo of mine and those Kanons of theirs are surprisingly unreliable. One day, when roused by some association, this Jizo becomes furious, looks like a hell mask, and those Kanons put on the face of hungry ghosts. Life is so uncertain. Where can we find a firm footing? Human life is always quivering with uncertainty. When the circumstances are good, we do a little good. When they're bad, we may be doing anything. Painfully, the uncertainty of life is borne in upon one. For some 3 weeks of each month, I'm away from the temple. I'm not often home, and so when I do come back, I send a postcard 2 or 3 days beforehand, saying exactly what time to the minute I shall be at the tram stop. And then I anticipate that I shall be met. The day comes. In the train, I have a pleasant feeling with nothing on my mind. And in the tram car too, there's a feeling of emptiness. My mind is clear. Someone will be meeting me. I descend at the stop and look around, look everywhere. But no one has come to meet me. Not a soul. And where has gone that pleasant feeling? Where has Jizo gone? Where has faith gone? Where has Satori gone? I hardly ever get home. I told them the exact time. However busy they may be, surely someone could meet me. These ignoble hell feelings arise. This is the simple truth. However I try to suppress them, they will not be suppressed. Such is the truth of one's delusion of self. Such is the truth of one's delusion of self. Can one see the truth in the delusion? Why didn't they meet me? I try to suppress it, but I cannot. And that is the manifestation of what we are. Having done a little bit of spiritual training in my life, I scold myself at making all this fuss in my heart over nothing at all. Pick up my bag and I walk to the temple. I come up to the gate and someone comes out. Oh, I was just coming to meet your reverence. We got your postcard with the time, but there was an emergency suddenly, so please excuse us. And greeted by his smiling face, this Abbott's hell heart disappears. Why, of course, how natural it was. And I feel completely happy and content. The heart revolves endlessly. Suddenly angry, suddenly at peace. Where can one find a firm foothold? Going in, I call, "A cup of tea, please." "Why, yes, we've been expecting you and the water's on the boil." I feel more and more pleased. Nowhere like home. But perhaps it isn't like that. When I get to the gate, no one comes out. More and more annoyed, I go in. "Bring a cup of tea." My voice is as yet quietish. I didn't say that right. It's still quietish. When there's no answer, I call again, my voice a little bit louder. Still no answer. Now I'm shouting, aren't you bringing that tea? Isn't it pathetic? As I've shouted, so now there's a shout coming back. Coming! It is a row already. In that coming are a million shades of meaning. While the cat's away, we were getting on nicely. And now the old man suddenly come back, and as usual there'll be a fuss over every little thing. He's so crotchety. It's all in the coming. I've caught it. And I cannot take that one word calmly. He's seeing all along. Suppose the tone was bad, he says. Suppose the tone was bad. Yet is not the relationship of teacher and pupil most close? A relationship that cannot be severed? And in the homes of the world, isn't the parent-child relationship similarly close? Though the children answer rudely, though the disciple answers rudely, ought we not be unmoved by it? Not ought we, can we be unmoved by it? That question one must ask and leave sit there and find out. Never take anything for inevitable, because then you're stuck in inevitability. I preach about human conduct. I'm supposed to be practicing spiritual training. Am I then so pitiable I cannot swallow one word without an upsurge of anger? When I'm brought to penetrate to the truth of that I, which is the truth of myself, when I realize what the self really is, then renunciation appears of itself. And there's already freedom from the body and the heart. By the profound prajna paramita, we penetrate to the bottom of life, know the truth of ourselves, and then we cannot help renouncing. When the discipline has been done, I see the world of liberation is already here. We will end here.